So this is one of the things that I love about this forum is the kind of continuing conversation. I feel like what we're going to talking about and what you guys are doing is a continuation of the conversation I had with Jill and Brady earlier about the kind of cultural transformation that we're talking about here instead of the sort of more conventional kinds of activism that many of us are familiar with. And I also share what Amy said when I first heard about what you guys were doing about putting climate into gaming. I thought, this is freaking brilliant. This is like such a cool thing that it never even like occurred to me before. And it's like a kind of great conceptual leap. So Kathy, I think, you have a goal of trying to reach 1 billion people. Tell me about your decision to get into gaming and how you thought about that.
So I have a rock star colleague. Her name is Rose Mann, and she worked closely in another part of her career with the president of Full Sail University. This is a university in Orlando. Chance is a graduate. And Full Sail produces the very best in the industry for gaming and graphics and music and all of the technical support and visuals and creativity that goes with Universal and Disney and lots of creative industries. And so Rose was attending an induction ceremony of Chance and his fellow classmate and our colleague, Grant Schunkweiler, who is a co-creator of Fortnite, and they were being inducted into the Hall of Fame. And as they were giving their acceptance remarks, I think Chance said, at that point, 3 billion people play video games every day on every continent, and half are women. And at that moment, we were getting started with our center and had set the goal to reach 1 billion people. We knew that technology was going to be one of the ways we do that. And Rose had the big light bulb. Wait a minute, we can put our evidence-based resilience and adaptation solutions, climate survival skills, essentially, into the games that people are already playing. If half are women, we're going to reach everybody everywhere. And there is so much work to try to find eyeballs and find people. That whole step is skipped by doing this. And the beauty of the industry and of Chance and Grant is that they know how to make a game fun. So it's not that you're watching an educational video, which has great value, but you often don't know that the content is there. You're just playing the game and advancing yourself. And so we'll talk about metrics in a little bit, but that was the big aha moment for us, is that the industry is now reaching 3.2 billion people, and in COVID, people turn to games more and more. And there are all kinds of games. These are games you play. Does anybody here play Wordle? Yeah, okay, so that counts as a game. And you can play on your phone, but you can play on a console, you play as groups, it's a social activity. So we said at that moment, this is something for us, and let's go find out. And we asked the question, and we had a call with Chance and Grant. We actually went to Full Sail and had a meeting with you.
A whole presentation, yeah.
Yep, did a whole presentation. We talked about what we were doing, and the funniest thing to me was that you said, whatever you do, don't try to make a game. Do not do that. It will not be fun. Do not do this. You can tell us what you want people to do, and we have a list of evidence-based things, of actions we want people to take. And we can talk about what they are later. We'll get into the conversation. But some things that people do to protect themselves and get their communities educated and acting.
So Chance, tell me a little bit about, it was interesting to hear what your first response was, is don't do a game.
Oh no, I'm sorry. What he meant was, don't you try to make it fun. We do that.
Right,
you don't do
right,
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm interested in what your first response was when you heard this idea, and tell us a little bit about basically how you've gone about doing it.
Yeah, so it made perfect sense with, like Kathy said, the last data we had was 3.2 billion, but I'm fairly confident it's closer to 3.5 billion now since the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
A lot more people staying inside. And I think that, the most important thing is people have to play the game first to even get the information you're trying to get across, right? So most important thing is to make a fun game, right? If it's not fun, people don't play it, and no one hears what you're trying to say. I think the last good educational game was probably Oregon Trail. Who's played Oregon Trail? Yeah.
Love it.
From the Oregon Trail generations, Gen X,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Millennial, So yeah, it's most important just, make sure that you're working with games and it's fun and you're not trying to turn a good fun game into an educational game. You're finding games where these themes work, right? There are a lot of game genres where our themes, our climate themes, are already touched on, but they might need an expert to work with them to get things right, For instance, like survivor games, you're going out in the forest and you're scavenging for resources, right? You're constantly being exposed to climate. So a game like a survivor game like that, or a game where you scavenge, is like a perfect genre to be working in some of these climate-related situations, right? It just gets a little more tricky when you're like, okay, how do I take Scrabble and make it about climate, right? Or something like that. So we purposely seek out games that either are already touching on climate and work with them to kind of expand upon that, or we just work with any sort of project that this can fit, right? Rather than trying to fit a square where you've got a circular hole,
Right. So as we all know, climate is a very polarized thing. How do you think about that when you try to build this into gaming, and what kind of do you think about that? And then what kind of feedback and response have you had? I mean, have you had people who are thinking, giving you feedback and saying this is, this climate change is bullshit, this is not happening, why, and turning them off the game rather than making it more deeply integrated?
Yeah, so it's actually almost been zero problem, actually. There's a pretty small minority of people that think there's no connection between humans and climate change, even in the United States today, right? And the one situation I had, it was like the height of the opening of the pandemic, where it's like, okay, we're going to try to do events now, but you have to get vaccine, you have to be wearing masks. It was right after we kind of were opening back up, and this is in Florida, so it's like, we were going early, right? And there was this one person, and she was the only person in the entire room not wearing a mask. And it's like, so you're doing subliminal messaging? It's like, I'm out here doing a presentation for the public. How is this subliminal, right? And honestly, if anything ever comes up, there's nothing really controversial about climate resilience. How many people don't think heat waves exist, or hurricanes? That's propaganda, keeping the kids safe from 100-degree temperatures. What kind of propaganda is? You just don't get that.
Yeah.
Because climate has existed since humans have existed, and there's really no climate deniers in the sense that climate doesn't exist, right?
Right.
So whether there was, let's say we lived in a better universe where we didn't have this issue with climate change, we'd still need to keep people safe from climate.
Right. Right.
So.
Right. That's a great way to put it. So I think we have Marina to join us on Zoom.
Maybe.
Hi, yeah. Are you able to hear me?
We have
We
a voice.
can hear you.
Yeah,
we don't see you, but we hear you. I guess we.
I'm sorry, I'm a disembodied voice. I'm having my own internet connections today. And so thanks. I actually would just want to add to what Chance just said about video gamers and climate change. We did a study with Yale's program on climate change communications last year, where we actually went out and asked gamers if they cared about climate change, whose fault they thought it was, what they wanted to do. And I encourage anyone to check it out. It was a great project. And what we identified is that gamers are as likely or more likely to be concerned about climate change and to want to take action. And what's exciting about this is that if you think about different forms of entertainment, like a TV show or a movie or a video game, people actually have a lot more agency in video games. They're expected to be a part of the storyline in there. And so it's really a wonderful, already built-in means of getting information out to folks about what they can do.
So that's a really interesting point. Marina or Kathy,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that we talk about a lot with climate is activism and getting people engaged to do things, right? And not just sit back and think that the world's on fire and we're all going to hell, right? Do you think that video games and the activeness that she's talking about, do you think that that actually encourages action? I mean, obviously it does in the text of the game, but in the larger sense of getting people to change their lives and think differently about their lives. Do you think that activism is an important part of this?
Well, and that's our hypothesis, and that's part of what we're setting out to prove, is that with information and actionable guidance, you can take it out of the game. One of the big aspects of surviving disasters is social cohesion. One of the biggest indicators is if you know your neighbors, you're more likely to survive. And so can we, and I think the answer is yes, have people take their knowledge out of the game. One example in the simulated society type games, and we have a game that we work with called Eco, and 750,000 people play Eco. It's a new game. And you can make decisions about how you're going to develop your community. And if you cut the mangroves down and build your house on the coast, when a hurricane comes, you and your house get wiped out. So it tells you, don't cut the mangroves, put your house behind the mangroves to protect yourself. And this is one example of very actionable things that you learn. And then in terms of getting people civically engaged, absolutely. How do you get into the community and ask for the things that you want from your elected leaders and appointed officials? You want something to happen in your community. We learned about it in the game. You can take it outside of the game. I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to hear about the climate SIG and the industry and the developers conference, because to show the massive interest from the industry, and I know Marina has done additional research with the Yale Climate Communication Center that's worth noting. We'll probably get to it, but I didn't want to leave without talking about that.
All right, do you want me to cover that a little bit?
Yeah, if you
Yeah, so Climate SIG is Climate Special Interest Group, but it's within the game industry, right? And so we are a Discord server. Discord, if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of like a game-oriented Slack with over 750 devs, developers that are involved, that all work in different parts of the game industry, but want to have a very big impact on society through gaming regarding climate, right? So it's been really encouraging to see how many people have sprung into action, people with PhDs, people, Microsoft, Unity, Epic, Unreal, all these different companies. And through that, we've, collaborated with some people in SIG and put together a climate workshop for the Game Developers Conference. And the Game Developers Conference is like the #1 world conference for people that develop games. And we put together a workshop that equips developers with the knowledge and skills that they need to integrate these climate themes into their game. How do you design a game for change, a game that actually changes people's behavior? And the idea behind this is we can't possibly, our relatively small team, work with every single game studio on the planet, every game, right? But if we can equip game developers on their own will to just go out and integrate these into existing games, that's a much more effective way to get that message out there, is just give people the skills to do what we need to do and let that organically unfold.
So, Marina, are you here?
I am here.
Oh, good.
I mean, I'm here and you're there, but I'm kind of
Okay,
here.
I want to bring you back in because I know you work with a lot of gamers and creators and developers and things, and talk a little bit about the kind of gaps that you see in support for this kind of for this movement.
Yeah, and this is one of the many reasons why I'm so sad I'm not with all of you right now, because I know that there's been a lot of interesting conversations about finance, and where money itself doesn't seem to be a shortage that I've seen, at least not where I sit, 20 miles north of Silicon Valley, and as an advisor to climate tech investments. The money adjacent issues that I would see are about how to get the right amount of it into the right developer hands at the right stage of projects to have a maximum impact. And the traditional video game ecosystem, like the VCs and the studios and the publishers and the developers, they're not yet linked up with the existing climate solutions ecosystems. So, all of you there, the nonprofits and the research community and philanthropists and government agencies. So I think that there's a certain amount of matchmaking that needs to happen to bring these two worlds together. And, I'm hoping you'll all be able to do some of that in this afternoon session. So if money isn't the primary gap, what is? We touched on it a little bit, but technical knowledge, this is kind of Chance's world, right? How we get an amazing climate resilience idea executed using the existing, sometimes kind of clunky technology tools and game engines that are out there. And that's, a little bit of question of like workforce development and steering AI capabilities in the right direction to support that. The other one is domain expertise. Kathy touched on this a little bit. So, expertise in climate science and policy solutions. Game developers know how to make a video game. They don't have PhDs in coastal geomorphology, and they don't know how to legislate, urban heat resilience policy. But if those games are going to make an impact, they need to have access to those experts. And then the third gap I see is in impact campaigns. So if you think about the impact that we want, thinking through what that impact is going to be needs to happen a lot earlier in the creative process. So if you want to build the right kind of measurable interventions into a game or a VR experience, you've got to do that from the start. Like if you want people to join a cause community, you've got to put that content into your game early. If you want them to be doing something in the real world and you're showing a VR experience at a science museum, you need to be developing those relationships. So it's all of that sort of non-monetary strategy issues that I'd say are the gap now, and that I think is the real power of the conversation that you're all having.
That's interesting. So for any of you, I mean, one of the things about sort of the growth of this and the development of this is the same problem that I face in journalism and things, and I see broadly in our communication about climate, is misinformation, right? Mm-hmm. One can imagine, as you talk about developers and the growth of this, the difficulty of, understanding the science of actually like the stuff that's in the games are, right. And it's not like, oh, there's more CO2, everything's greener, how wonderful. It's a better place, How do you think about that, about the not the policing, but the accuracy? Is it, how is that going to work? How's that going to play out?
Well, I think that, when you're making a game, and like I talked earlier about not taking a good game and making it educational, is you have to feed them little bits and pieces. You're not trying to turn them into someone who's an expert in climate because they played your game. That's just not going to happen, right? So sometimes you're kind of simplifying some of these overall ideas and themes to get people to learn the knowledge that they need to learn, rather than trying to throw, the knowledge of someone with a PhD at them while they're trying to, beat up Ryu in Street Fighter, right? So yeah, it's like you have to.
Although that would be cool if you could.
Yeah, you have to work with bite sizes that are very digestible, rather than trying to make them into experts.
Right. And so, Kathy, how do you when we think about the kind of growth of this, and even now at this stage, which is so fascinating, how do you think about success? What are the kind of metrics of okay, it's one thing to have this in the game, and then the other thing is to say, okay, what difference is it making, and how do you think about that?
Well, one of the things that is so delicious about this strategy is that people advance in levels in a game. And so if people are showing you that they have new skills and new knowledge that's been acquired in the game, then they have advanced in the game. So we can have access to data that shows these players have advanced to this level, and so we can say these people have acquired this knowledge. Now, the evaluation side of did people that acquired that knowledge take it outside of the game and do X, Y, and Z, I think there's some work for us to do in terms of that type of evaluation. But at least watching people behave inside a game, that's the beauty of the technology. You have to have the agreement with the gaming company to do that, which is why, as Chance is saying, getting in really early in creating, what are the expectations that we have about, what we're trying to do in terms of conveying actionable guidance to people, and the game, we're trying to make a successful, fun game, and just make sure those things go together. But the early signs are that at least that first level of evaluation is possible.
Right. So, Jance, you and I were. Oh, yes, Marina?
Thanks. I just wanted to build on that and say, what Kathy said is right. Games allow us to see what players are doing in ways that other forms of media don't. And there's a lot of great efforts underway now to think about how we best stitch together our, digital and real world selves. And there are feedback loops in a game. You can, invite someone to go take a real world action and then give them in-game rewards, or people can find in the real world, motivations for doing in-game actions. And so those kinds of mechanisms, I think, are really powerful and important, especially for younger generations who have a very like cohesive understanding of themselves as both digital citizens and citizens in the real world. So I think it's going to be a really rich conversation this afternoon. What are the opportunities that we have existing to partner with organizations that have large data sources, and then understand how we can motivate real world behavior change in game?
Right. And this question about the connection between, what happens in our digital world and our real world, of course, is not like only in the gaming world. It's like same thing with, like, someone reads one of my magazine articles. Does it make any difference? Do they change their life? I mean, that's like the $60 million question in all of this storytelling stuff is what is the link between the stories that we tell and the lives that we live? And that's the complexity of all this, and that's also the beauty of this, because it's going at this from another angle, another way. So Chandra, I think that this is for me and for everybody. I want to hear more specifics. So when we were on the bus from the airport, I somehow mentioned that my daughter is really into jujitsu, and you mentioned that you're really into jujitsu, and then you mentioned that you're launching a new game that's about jujitsu, and that is like very cool idea. And you're like leaving like tomorrow to go.
Saturday, I go to Sao Paulo to do the world premiere of our trailer for Martial Arts Tycoon Brazil.
All right, so take us into some detail about what this is, because you told me on the bus about it. It's really fascinating, and I want to hear in real detail about what this is.
So Martial Arts Tycoon is a game, if you've ever played, say, maybe a SimCity, Roller Coaster Tycoon, The Sims, it's a game about martial arts, but you're not doing the martial arts. You're not, mashing the buttons and fighting. You're actually managing a gym. And after I worked on Call of Duty, I moved to Brazil for about 3.5 years. I lived in Rio de Janeiro, two blocks from a favela, right? I got back into jiu-jitsu when I lived there, right? And realized over time that it would be really interesting to have a game where you're actually managing. You're like the professor, the gym professor, teaching the students, upgrading the equipment, paying the bills, hiring, other teachers, the janitor, all this stuff, right? And as I worked with Arsht-Rock, I realized, like, a lot of these themes that we're getting in other games would actually fit in my game, right? And and this is what we did with Martial Arts Tycoon. So Arsht-Rock came up with a naming and categorization system for heat waves. Now, hurricanes, everyone's familiar with this. Oh, there's a hurricane coming. Tell me about it. Oh, category 4. Its name is Gustavo. And people are like, oh no, Gustavo's coming, right? They treat Gustavo like a supervillain, like it's got a persona, and they respect it. When there's a heat wave, they're like, well, how hot is it? I don't know, man, dang hot. I just reckon just eat some Gatorade or something, like, there's no, like, people don't approach heat waves in the same way that they do hurricanes, even though heat waves kill way more people than hurricanes.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet?
Not yet.
All right, yeah, okay, well.
Yeah, no, that's our work. That's our work.
Yeah, exactly. And so in our game, you're training these fighters outside, and we took the median temperatures of Rio de Janeiro, and we basically rolled the dice on a temperature for each day, and there's a very small chance that one day you could have a heat wave. But it's not just there's a heat wave, it actually says it's category 0, 1, 2, or 3. That's a system that we're implementing. And by the time you get to 2 or 3, especially if you're elderly, or you have health conditions, you're very likely to have some issues if you're in this heat wave for too long. And so in the game it says, okay, it's category 2, and based on how intense this heat wave is, you have to do things to protect your characters, protect your fighters. So that might mean building some shade for the fighters when they're on the roof, could be adding some kind of hydration station, could be closing down your gym for a whole day because you don't want to risk one of your fighters getting hurt, getting a heat exhaustion or a stroke, and now this person can't fight, and now you're losing money because they're not winning you money through their fights, right? And so what will happen, in theory, is that people will play this game, and we're piloting the system all around the world right now. Seville, Athens, where else?
LA,
LA.
Miami.
Yeah. And so when this goes international and comes to their locale, they're gonna be like, you know what? I remember playing this game. I should probably not go outside today. And this is all stuff that is integrated in the game in a way that makes sense. It's not even part of the story. It's literally part of the full simulation of this world that we've created, right? So this whole simulation will actually unfold stories that are not scripted. And I think that's what makes it really interesting, is that you have this character that you get attached to who has a background, a life, an age, you know, and you're trying to help them maybe achieve their goals of not getting bullied at school, and then all of a sudden they have heat exhaustion or heat stroke, and you're kind of disappointed. You feel bad for them in a sense, right? So yeah, that's a good example of how you can integrate something that just works within the game. It's not like we're shoving this down your throat. It's just part of the simulation.
One of the things that you told me when we were talking yesterday that I thought was so cool was, to talk about the detail and precision of the game, is you were talking about like when there's a heat wave and it rains and there's puddles of water, and if you don't pay the janitor the right amount of money to
so for instance,
clean.
You don't have a janitor or you don't have enough janitors to get everything done in your gym, and it rains and the temperature gets too high and that puddle stays there for too long, there's a small chance that mosquitoes will spawn, and those mosquitoes have a small chance of having Zika or dengue fever, which are actual big concerns in Brazil. And so not only are they learning to not go outside when it's too hot, but it's like if there's water, clean it up, because you don't want to get dengue. And in the game, if your fighters get dengue, they might be out for months, right? And now you're losing money.
So that is just so cool. It makes me feel like writing a book is so old-fashioned.
It's good that you can get excited about. Yeah. Maybe you should write our next story for the next game.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Can you imagine a game instead of Martial Arts Tycoon, like Heat Wave Gustav or something, where you manage the whole heat wave?
Heat Wave Gustavo.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention, we just have a minute plus left, but I wanted to also talk about the VR technology and our exploration and prototype of helping decision makers have a VR experience that sees the world when we make choices that put us at 1.5, 2.5, 3 degrees plus. And Chance and a group of our colleagues built a prototype for a donor really interested in informing, can VR be a tool to build leaders' awareness and empathy of a world where we make choices that put us at risk in the way that we built out this, the prototype it's Miami in, is it 2050, 2040?
2040, I think.
2040. Yeah. And in this experience, you see hurricanes, sea level rise, and you make different decisions in the experience that reduce the emissions, that reduce the impacts. And so the idea, and we have a paper that we wrote about thinking about this as a leadership tool, and we have this prototype that shows some great promise that you can build out a world and people can experience it so they know to make different decisions in their own communities and their own surroundings. And so I want to mention that aspect of when we think about interactive technologies, it provides, there's another angle to it. So I know we're running out of time, but yeah.
Well, I think that's such a powerful thing because, as a writer on this, one of the things I'm always trying to do is get people to understand the consequences and visualize it and create, in my last book, I actually started with a vision of Miami in 2040, and to be able to actually use VR and these tools to make this more real and to make this people really understand what is at stake here, I think is just completely fascinating. And so I'm very happy you guys are doing this. So we have to wrap this up, but I want to encourage everyone, we've been talking about this, but we get to go play with this. After lunch over at the hotel, Chance is going to be there and Kathy will be there, and we'll get to see some of the games that you're talking about, and I think they want your input. We want to talk about this.
It's going to be fun.
Real
demos.
hands-on things. So everybody come over afterwards and give this stuff a spin. And
you can win some prizes. Passive cooling right here.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.